Well, Senator Bridget McKenzie, welcome to the NACON Australia podcast.
I'm super excited, Dan. We're going to have a good chat.
I'm excited too.
All
Hey,
things conservative.
you attended CPAC Australia last weekend, and there were quite a few interesting speeches, and I thought yours was one of them, which is why I wanted to have a chat with you. Amongst other things, one of the statistics you highlighted is that the average age of a person buying their first home in Australia right now is 36. This has obvious implications for young people wanting to start families, amongst other things. Do you think we've been focusing on the wrong things in terms of indicators of economic health? Because it strikes me that Australian treasurers, both Labor and Liberal, will come out and give statements on things like nominal GDP, interest rates, consumer spending, unemployment rate, and the like. But there's far less fanfare. There's no press conference for important metrics like per capita GDP or the ability of young people to own property, fertility rates, reliance on overseas manufactured goods, employment in the private sector. Do we need a different framework for how to assess how we're doing as a nation?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. Obviously, economists have certain sets of data that they can track over time that are indicators of a healthy economy. I think the question you're asking is, a healthy economy mean a good society? And what we've seen in recent years is that our economic stats at that very macro level look quite healthy. And one of the things I was unpacking in my CPAC speech was that, the headline GDP figure for the nation looks good because we're pouring humans through migration in the top. But what is happening at a household level and at a community level is much less healthy. We see the GDP per capita falling. That means to everyday Australians that you are not as wealthy as you were. Your real income is going backwards and your household is finding it harder and harder to make ends meet. Similarly, with our birth rates, our fertility rates, we're not replacing, couples aren't replacing themselves. And we're having to, again, supplement that fact by increasing immigration. And you mentioned the average age of owning your first home's 36. That, again, has implications for when you're going to settle down and start having a family. Having a family is a very vulnerable time, particularly for women. You want to be set up and have some stability around you, which the family home provides. And so I think on a whole range of measures, we've sort of got it backwards. We want the good life. We want a good society. That means we need healthy families, healthy communities interacting. And I do think that our suite of policies and the things we've chosen to celebrate and crow about, such as the headline GDP, don't actually go to that deeper malaise. And then you've therefore got that disconnect. Young people in particular feeling politics isn't working for them. They don't feel they have ownership in our body politic. Governments aren't listening, etc., or aren't working for them. And that has huge implications, not just for results in elections, but their fundamental belief in democracy.
No problem. We used to talk about, in the recession we supposedly had to have in 1991, that the definition of recession was 2 quarters of negative GDP growth. But we've now had 7 quarters, I believe, of per capita GDP growth. Shouldn't there be kind of like headlines every day talking about the recession that Australia is in? Because that's what matters.
Well, the recessions that Australians are having to have because of this economic system we've set up. And some of us try and raise this on morning TV programs, on Sky News, in articles we write. But when everyday Australians hear that, it also isn't in language that resonates with them either. They know they're going backwards. They know they're having to cancel the kids' swimming lessons this term because they can't put 3 of them through that and also pay the school fees. So in a real sense, they understand it. But because we're not talking about it in the media, because it doesn't suit the media, Dan, it doesn't suit the major parties, it doesn't suit the elites, it doesn't suit big corporations, and it definitely doesn't suit big bureaucracies and big government, which is essentially where we're at as a nation.
Yeah. Another portion of your speech, which I thought was quite striking, because it kind of broke a bit from the sort of Howard era consensus was when you said, some of us still like to say, I'm economic liberal and socially conservative. Now I'm convinced that this country has papered over a large crack between liberalism and conservatives for too long. We tried to make this unholy marriage survive for political expediency. No more, no more. Because what happens with excessive liberalism at its endpoint is self-autonomy that becomes the only form of morality. The very
Mm.
things that maintain a good life, the family, the community, and the nation state are corroded. I mean, I'm sympathetic to that view, and it's part of the reason why the National Conservative Institute was established. Um, and I don't think the centre right has really appreciated how destructive a type of unchecked liberalism can be to the
Mm.
nation state, institutions, and even the definitions of words like women and the rest of it. But what practically would you like to see to restrain this unbridled liberalism? Because that's when I think it becomes much more difficult, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The practical enactment of our conservatism, if you like. And I think that's been the role of the National Party and the Country Party before it in Australian politics. We've been in the federal parliament for over a century, and we've been the handbrake, shall we say, on unbridled socialism from the Labor Party, but also unbridled neoliberalism from the Liberal Party.
Mm,
Whether you're going back to Black McEwen, whether you're going back to Doug Anthony, Peter Nixon in the Fraser era, or indeed the National Party during the Howard era. I think one of, and again, even in recent times, standing up for things like The Voice and being the first little party when the polls were all against us, when 70% of Australians were saying they were going to vote yes, the little old National Party stood up and said, you know what? Respectfully, we're no, and this is the reasons why. We're not anti-reconciliation or a fair deal for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. We think that can be improved. But we don't think we should be changing our founding document to differentiate between different citizenry in this country, a very conservative principle. So they're the ways the National Party, over at the century, we've been a party of government, a conservative party of government, and I would argue the only conservative party of government in the Australian Parliament.
mm.
Um, we've been able to play that role quite significantly, genuinely, authentically, and it's why we're still here.
Yeah, I was going to get to John McEwen later on, but you're champing at the bit, so let's get straight into that one. You wrote a book in 2020 entitled John McEwen, Right Man, Right Place, Right Time.
Mm,
John McEwen is routinely described, I think inaccurately, as an agrarian socialist.
mm.
It's a particularly dumb term, I believe, when you actually look at the man. Um, but how would you describe his approach to developing policy in Australia in those post-war years?
Yeah, well, I think we can put, those post-war years in Australia, the economic development, down to John McEwen. Menzies obviously spent a lot of time overseas, particularly in the United Kingdom, but it was John McEwen in his industry portfolio that really opened our country up to secondary industry, manufacturing. He realised we couldn't rely on the mother country anymore, and we shouldn't be a dumping ground for her manufactured goods, and that Asia was on our doorstep, and we really needed to heal that relationship, particularly with Japan, and get on with being a leader in our region, which we did under his stewardship. So, um, really, for him, he was a very practical, pragmatic man. And I think if you wanted to, how do you describe conservatism as a political philosophy to average Australians? It's that we're practical and common sense solutions, right? Which really is how he embodied that political philosophy in the work that he did. And, we hear agrarian socialism, it's still thrown at us by the media as a political movement in the current form, which I think, again, just serves to minimise the contribution that our conservative movement makes to Parliament, makes to community, and makes to the policy development or restraint here in Australia. And it suits certain holders of power, shall we say, to minimise our contribution by calling us agrarian socialists, because we're not agrarian socialists. We've never been agrarian socialists. We actually fight socialism. We're for free enterprise. We're for the family. One of the articles in our constitution is we want a society based on Christian ethics and loyalty to the crown. You can't get more conservative and you can't get more public about our conservatism than putting that in our founding document as a political movement. So it suits a whole lot of vested interests to marginalise the National Party,
Mm,
because I believe Australia is fundamentally a conservative country. I think the Labor Party has conservative elements, particularly in Labor right.
mm,
If you speak to Labor right factional people, they want to see nuclear power. They don't want to see us deindustrialise. They are for the US alliance, support the state of Israel, all the sorts of
mm,
things. They're men and women of faith.
mm,
And there are conservatives in the Liberal Party. But the only party that is set up to operate as a conservative political force, not a populist party, but a conservative political force within government, is the National Party. So I think it does suit a whole lot of vested interests to minimise that role. And that's why we continually are part of the bust-ups that happen. And you know, we will continue to be so.
Yeah, it strikes me that there's a constant sort of framing of John McEwen being the arch protectionist and Menzies being
Mm,
supposedly the guy who was, a economic, open borders liberal of his time and was being held back by these sort of backward National Party types. My reading of history is that Menzies, as you would expect, with the industrial interests of Melbourne, was actually
mm,
very much in favour of protectionism. He's on the record of saying that numerous times. And John McEwen was much more about protection all round, but also he was the primary driver of that first, Japanese Australia trade agreement. So it's a
yeah.
more of a kind of trade realism that the guy had about tacking in accordance with the times. And I've almost also read that Menzies even stepped out of the cabinet room when that trade agreement with Japan was going to be signed, and John McEwen, because it was going to be a major market for primary goods, he was much more of the kind of driver for it. So that's not how it's portrayed in sort of out
No.
of center right folklore, right?
Well, the victor writes the history, right? And we're doers, so we've
Yep.
never been particularly good at writing, which is one of the reasons. We're doers, we don't write our history as probably we should. The fact is, McEwen did open us up, get that first economic partnership agreement with Japan that really laid the foundation for an industrial sector, that secondary manufacturing that we all now are bemoaning is going offshore thanks to Labor's energy policies. And it is true that I think if you look at McEwen and the National Party's contribution more broadly, we're exporters. If
Mm,
you're on the farms in regional Australia, you are literally exporting 80% of what we produce. And developing those secondary industries, whether it's mineral processing, food processing, fibre processing, or increasing now defence industry, they are very much not just regional in industries and businesses, but more broadly for our capital cities too. I think it suits certain people for that to be the case. When I spoke to John Howard about my book, and I hope he won't mind me saying this to you,
mm.
but,
We're
I
all
think
friends here. Yeah.
anybody w yeah, NatCon, we're all friends. But he said, "Bridge, like, we were all like, everyone was protectionist back then,
Mm,
right? It was we were a small middle power trying to make our way in a world, the WTO had just been set up. McEwen, was instrumental in driving, the World Trade Organization set up the rules in the Kennedy round around anti-dumping to make sure those really large powers who were looking forward to flooding emerging nations like Australia, like South Africa, like Canada, with their manufactured goods out of Europe, the UK, and the US. We set up the anti-dumping framework within the World Trade Organization to actually mitigate against that and allow middle powers the right to compete, because
mm.
we want fair trade, we want free trade, but we don't think it should be ferociously unfair. And I
Mm,
think that's when you see those negative outcomes for community, for society, for the family, um, when you have unrestrained greed. And I think that's the great tenet of conservatism. We understand man is fallen and requires limits of whether it's church or culture or government to on man's very innate desire to consume, whether it's
mm,
chocolate, wine, or, or all manner of bad things, pornography.
mm.
It's
Yeah, you
unrestrained
mentioned that in the speech too,
desire.
Mm,
That I think it is right to limit if you
mm,
want a good society and for humans to be everything they can be as individuals and within community. That's what we want to achieve. And I think when the balance gets out of balance, it's the National Party that stands up and says, "Hang on, we need to change our Competition and Consumer Act, Section 46, around unconscionable behaviour." We think divestiture powers are a good thing in
mm.
this country. So, on a range of factors, I think we serve that role. And for me, going into the next election, one of the things I also talked about in CPAC, and one of the sort of tenets, I think, of our party is around the family and making
Mm.
sure that men and women um, can partner, have families, care for them, create communities, and really experience the good life as we're meant to. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean sending us back to the 50s, though, guys.
No, no, well, there's costs and benefits of all different things, but do you think on the National Party, just to linger a little bit longer,
Mm,
it is always and will be a defender of rural and
mm.
regional interests, right? And you say it's also a conservative party, but do you think that kind of means there's this sort of structural thing there where it means that um, it limits conservative thought within the Liberal Party because they can say they're the conservatives, we're the liberals, whereas actually there should be a much more kind of diffusion of conservative thinking within the so-called Liberal Party?
I think for us as a rurally based party, we would be one of the last in the world. There used to be
Mm,
a lot of rurally based parties. And I think the conservatism and the commitment to localism, the commitment to family and community, and that interdependence, if you like, on each
mm,
other is a function of where we come from, but it's
mm.
not restricted to only being experienced in regional
Yeah.
communities. You can obviously be a conservative and live in the cities. You can have community. So for me, as a senator, I obviously represent people in the city and
Mm,
people in the regions. And
mm,
there's always been a great debate, and particularly at times when the Liberal Party's in crisis, about why the National Party isn't running seats in
mm,
suburban or metropolitan capital cities. And if you're from Queensland, you've got a really good reason to ask that, because it was the National Party that was the dominant
mm,
centre-right party in that particular state prior to the LNP. So it is, I think, a continual rightful discussion to have um, when the other centre-right party is being deemed by voters and its supporters as not reflecting conservative values enough. And
mm,
I think, that's a serious and responsible thing for conservatives more broadly to bring to the table, because
mm,
the reality is the left is very well organised, they're very well resourced, they know what they're about, and they work together to defeat and destroy centre right parties, but more fundamentally, the things that we love and care about, things like the family, things like community, and that social contract, as we were talking about earlier, about young people being able to get into their home and get on with life. All of that is about dissolving the very things that make us
mm.
a great liberal democracy, and that's sort of the left's end goal, if you like. And we
Yeah.
can't
I mean,
afford to be complacent about that.
there's been such tumult in other Anglo democracies, the United States, the UK,
Mm,
and elsewhere. Reform looks like it will win. The Conservative Party, oldest,
yeah,
most successful party in the world, may no longer be
yeah,
a significant player. Um, but Australia,
yeah.
in some ways,
Question, Dan, um, because you're right. I think all of these names are just really labels in politics. And whether they're political parties, political movements, political leaders, come and go in a democracy, as we've seen over time. But it's really that deeper set of values and organising principles, such as a philosophy, uh, which are the anchor point. And so that's why I think Australia is essentially a conservative, fundamentally a conservative country. And we as political movements, leaders and parties need to work out how to communicate that in a modern era. But when you're referring to overseas, I don't think we should be surprised at all
Mm.
that the Tories are being taken over by Reform. The UK's economy is tanking. They've had illegal immigration significantly impact their economic, environmental, and social outcomes as a community. And they're rightfully saying enough. I mean, if the Brexit vote wasn't enough to make the Tories start to listen, I think in a democracy, in the end, the people will say, we've had it, and we're going to express that. I think the difference for us here is that, unlike the UK and unlike the Trump reshaping of the Republican movement in the US, we have compulsory voting. And I think that really does change the outcome for us. And so centre-right has to also talk to centre Australia, who I would argue are essentially conservatives, that we have been very bad at really putting a proposition in front of them that is tangible, that speaks to their frustration. And that's what I'm looking forward to doing. And that's partially what I was talking about in my CPAC speech, around that broken social compact,
Mm.
around if you're under 40, you think liberal democracy is not working for you, major parties aren't working for you because you can't get into a house. And if you have started a family, you can't afford to have the amount of kids you want to have and really care for them in the way that you wanted to do it.
We have these crammed metropolitan cities, which are
Mm-mm.
big by, American standards in many cases. And then we have these lovely towns like, Wagga and Wodonga and Townsville and all the rest of it. Um, s- but how do we make it more attractive
Oh.
for families to work and live in these towns? Because that seems like at least one practical solution to the problems that we have, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. So we've got these highly congested, aggressive, concrete jungles that are almost anti-human in as Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane, right? And we are pouring, well, in the last few years, 1.5 million additional people into it, right?
Mm.
Infrastructure can't cope, schools and hospitals can't cope, and the housing market clearly can't cope. And here we have, and we're also one of the most urbanized countries in the world, which is just nuts. Why can't we be more like Germany? Why can't we be more like the US, Canada, who have, you know, by the factor of 10 times more inland cities that are of significant population? And that was one of the policies as a former minister in the coalition government. I'd develop a regionalisation policy to really put significant funding behind supporting not just the attraction, but the connectivity that people need, the economic development opportunities that are needed, to really capitalise and be catalytic for those types of cities that are really just sitting on the brink of being able to make that next jump. So the types of things we looked at: did you have a university campus? Were you like 90 minutes from a capital city by road, rail, or air? Um,
Mm.
good hospital services and a diverse local economy that meant you really could move there and have a great globally focused career, which is what people want to have. So
Mm.
they want that community piece that a regional city can give, but they also don't want to have to sacrifice their career prospects. So all that does exist. And I think it really needs both leadership in talking about it, promoting it, um, changing culture around that, as well as the policy settings at a state and federal level that really drive investment into those handful of places where that can
mm,
happen.
mm,
Too often we tend to sprinkle our fairy dust lightly everywhere, and that really doesn't drive the types of outcomes we need to see in those other types of countries that you talk about where we have seen, you know, cities of 1 million people that aren't capitals, and that's what I'd really like to see. And in the last two elections, I've been fighting to have a population and settlement policy. We haven't
mm.
done a green and white paper as a country since Malcolm Fraser was in government. That's a long time ago, and many of your viewers weren't alive. So I was in kindergarten, so it's a long time ago. So it's about time, right, that we have
Mm.
a population and settlement conversation that's respectful. There are certain cohorts of immigrants that are going to contribute positively to making us more prosperous, making us more secure, particularly in the regional context, and more sustainable. And there are certain cohorts that aren't. And I think as a country as rich um, and diverse as we are, we should be unafraid to say very confidently that we want you to come and help us build this great country, but we want you to be brave enough to live where we need you to live with all the wonderful skills that you're bringing in with you, and to spread that population growth in a sustainable way rather than keep pouring it into already congested capital cities.
But how do you do that practically, Bridget? Because
Mm.
um, it occurs to me, back in 30, 40 years ago, there used to be many more manufacturing businesses in regional towns. I mean, in North Queensland, where I'm originally from, they used to manufacture trains.
Yeah.
Um, you know, that like and railways, obviously, and the rest of it. And there were in regional Victoria and everywhere else much more tinkering and
Mm.
third tier industries there, which
Mm.
sustains bigger populations and make it more attractive for people to stay there. And one of the kind of unintended consequences of the sort of open borders trade is that, why does it need anything from Shepparton when it can just order it from Shenzhen in China? Uh,
That's
Essentially, right? So,
yeah.
so, so, I mean, and there has been, as a result, a sort of flooding into the cities. It does sort of advantage the port
Mm.
cities, this regime. And I'm just wondering, like, again, how practically you can throw a
Mm.
lot of government money at these towns, and there should be a lot of infrastructure to build our cities, but you've got to make them kind of the structure has to make them viable as genuine private enterprises
Correct.
which survive
Correct.
outside of government
Going
funds.
concerns. Yeah, we want
Exactly.
going concerns, right? We want
Yeah.
private investment.
Yeah.
So if I talk about the type of manufacturing that's happening in a place like regional Victoria, here in Wodonga, we've got the Mars factory. We still manufacture a whole lot of pet food, etc. We've got a lot of engineering firms here locally that service we've got 2 defence bases that
Mm,
service the defence industry. A lot of F-35 components are being made right around small engineering firms in regional towns. You don't know about it, but it is happening out here.
mm,
And it isn't their sole business, but it's a part of their whole business that really sustains them. So it is happening out here. But when you have energy prices going up by 39%, as we're seeing under the Labor Party with their 100% renewables push, uh, that is harder and harder to make happen. And so you're seeing manufacturing and industrial capacity move offshore, or you're seeing it automate. That is actually the practical impact of the Labor Party's policy. So when Albo says future made in Australia, uh, look what's actually happening with jobs and manufacturing capacity. That's why, though, in a practical sense, when we're in government, we invested in the Inland Rail to really go
mm,
from Melbourne Port to Brisbane Port and everywhere in between, so that it wasn't just our primary produce that was getting on track and into ports, whether it's Newcastle, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, or in the end, maybe Gladstone, but also a lot of that manufacturing capacity that's happening out in places like Parks and Dubbo, here in Albury, Wodonga, being able to, because it's going to be as quick, if not quicker, to use that train than put it on the back of a truck. So the practical things we can do is make our transport sector, our trucking and our freight task more productive and efficient than it is at the moment. That means investing in roads and logistics hubs and the like, but also making sure you're not taxing truck drivers and trucking industries or expecting everyone to be Toll or Linfox, only the big boys, only having a system that works for the big boys. So there's practical things we can do there in investment. And also one of the key parts that when you're thinking about how to invest, how does government inject funding rather than just subsidise industries like you're seeing under the Labor Party at the moment, is having a local plan. So asking these businesses themselves, so my region where I'm pointing behind me, my region where I live, Albury-Wodonga, services 250,000 Australians, huge diverse economy, army bases, primary production, but engineering capability and health services as well. Asking this community, where do you see yourself by 2050? Righto, we want to be good at this, we want to be good at that, we need this many more people who have these type of skills, etc. And the local community coming up with where they want to be, and then government partnering with the community rather than the top-down approach, which we typically get out of Canberra, Macquarie Street or Spring Street or Brisbane. So that is a more conservative approach, because some regions are ready to take that jump. Some regions want to say, we want to be 500,000 people by 2050. We want to be a manufacturing hub for food or timber or whatever they want to do. Other regions are saying, we don't want to grow anymore. We want to stay small. And that should be determined by locals, having those local community conversations with, big employers that they have in towns, such as we have here in Albury-Wodonga. So I'm confident that there are regions around the country that are happy to have that conversation, are ready to go. Their local council comes to us in Canberra with, and it's not just the regional city council. They've got all the periphery local councils that will benefit from that as well. When you see 7 or 8 local councils working forward in a decade or multi-decadal vision for themselves, that's when you know that community's ready for the type of investment rather than picking winners, which I don't think is a smart way to spend taxpayers' money.
Let's talk about a slightly bigger community, the state of Victoria, of which you're a senator.
My poor state.
Yeah, I mean,
the socialist state of Victoria.
Used to be, though, famously the jewel on the crown of the Liberal Party, and plenty of National Party seats there too, including the John McEwen, who we were just talking about. How do you explain what has occurred there? Why has there been such a change in that state, which is very, we have our issues here in Queensland, but very anti-development, at least from a distance. It's not a hate on Victoria. Some of my best friends are Victoria, and all the rest of it. We want you to succeed. But what is going on?
I love that. I know Victorians. They seem really nice.
That's right. Yeah,
crazy but nice. Yeah,
no, they're nice.
I think it is a travesty when you've got Premier Malinauskas just across the way in South Australia saying, "I'm coming for your industrial base, Victoria." He literally made a speech about coming for our medium enterprises, that if you're interested in manufacturing, if you really want to be a business that's growing, come to South Australia because you're finished in Victoria. And under Labor in this state, businesses are leaving. We've had net migration out of our state, and a lot of them will be centre-right voters, all in southeast Queensland, I think they've come to, Dan. Yeah, post-COVID, because the lack of freedom that we experienced under Dan Andrews was significant. The economic devastation, not just of COVID, but of the economic policies of the state Labor government. And sadly, we need to have an opposition that's prepared to be that alternative vision. It's one thing to rip the left down, to showcase their inadequacies, but you have to give a positive alternative vision of where you want to take people. And
Mm.
that is the challenge for the state opposition. Now, I'm not going to give the Liberals lessons on what they need to do. That's a matter for them. I am a very proud member of the Victorian National Party, and at the last state election, we grew our party. We took seats back off independents in regional capitals like Shepparton, a very diverse community. Mildura, again, very multicultural community. We won back the Latrobe Valley mining community, a bit like your central Queensland seats. All came back to the National Party. And so whilst the Liberal Party lost more seats. And so I do think we need an alternative vision that people feel reflects their aspirations for themselves, their family, and their business here in Victoria. And I'm hopeful that the state coalition can provide that heading into November's state election. I mean, it wasn't too long ago that you had the coalition here at the state level signing up to renewable targets of like 95%. And now you're seeing that roll out in regional communities and farmers being prepared to go to jail
Mm.
rather than have this impost on their private property rights. So I think the time for sitting on the fence is over, and hopefully we will see a very strong proposition from the state coalition heading into the next state election, because you've got David Crisafulli up there, and I know Jared and David and their team is doing a magnificent job in my own portfolio area, getting the CFMEU out of public infrastructure, etc.
Mm.
So that's exciting to see.
What it is, I mean, it's great to be. We're in Queensland. I think we're the largest centre-right government outside of the United States in the Anglo Commonwealth.
Amen.
Like,
Amen.
there's
Well
there's
done.
no one else. But I mean, that points to larger structural issues, because even in the last election in Queensland, we didn't win a new seat within 20k of the Brisbane CBD. And Victoria and Melbourne is obviously much more urbanised than Queensland is. So, and this is gonna, I mean, I'm sure you hate this question, but the polling on women in particular and young people are terrible.
Yeah.
How do you, and they conglomerate typically in the inner cities and the like.
Mhm.
How do you make a legitimate pitch to those people that someone they would never associate voting for, the Conservatives or the Liberals and the Nationals, God forbid, is suddenly the team that they should be voting for because it will improve their prospects? I mean, how do you make that pitch?
Well, like I probably have a style of politics that really reflects where I grew up,
Mm.
reflects my community, and reflects my political party, and we are hyper-local. So
Mm.
you can't really expect to walk down as an MP or a senator in the regions and walk down the main street of any of our regional capitals or country towns and not sort of be held to account by your local community about a decision that you made or a view that you might have expressed. And they own you. You know that.
Mm.
And that's not a bad thing in a democracy.
Mm.
I think politics is essentially about people. And so I I I think people have responded to the Greens, have responded to the Teals, because both of those political movements have deeply engaged with people where they're at, in their communities, at their sporting clubs, in their schools, etc. And that's what we have to do. That's what centre-right has to do. Have the town hall meetings.
Mm.
Go and have the conversations where people are actually gathering about the things they care about. Don't
Mm.
tell them what you think they care about. Ask them, what do you care about? And how can my political philosophy assist you? So the reason I spoke and I'm going to continue to speak about it, and I'm developing a family policy as we speak,
Mm.
about how can we be better for mums and dads and have children as our central focus.
Mm.
We didn't have a policy going into the last federal election that really focused on families and children
Mm.
and the good life from that perspective. How can we reimagine that social contract around ownership of your own home earlier.
mm,
And maybe we don't cling to our neoliberal economic
mm,
credentials with such fever. Maybe we meet people where they're at and reimagine a conservative, faith, family, community-based conversation and get out there and speak to people. Like, it's not
mm,
rocket science. And just like, everyone's, "Oh, Charlie Kirk." He was on campus having the conversations. The National Party is out in communities having the conversations. We got a 10% swing to the National Party in a seat like Bendigo, dead red, 12% margin. We got a 10% swing to us because we had a great local candidate who'd been the local
mm,
publican for 20 years,
mm,
local sports guy.
mm,
We invested in it properly and we got out there. We were at every park run, we were at every community market, we were everywhere. And people loved it.
mm,
So I think we've got to be braver. We've got to
mm,
get out there and meet people where they're at. And that's what I'm going to be doing and talking to them about the things that matter to them
mm.
rather than pretending we're the experts.
Yeah, I always like to all that local engagement's really obviously good stuff, and we have done well at Brisbane City Council level. We hold a metropolitan city in Australia um, quite overwhelmingly, really, in the number of seats, which is unusual in a metropolitan city in Australia.
Yeah.
Um, but I always go back to, there's a line that sort of Tucker Carlson likes to say, and I think Charlie Kirk said the same thing. It's that if your economic system is not producing um, a path for a young person of 23, 24 to have a realistic shot at owning a house where they can potentially support a wife on one income, because having a baby is means you're out of the workforce for a bit. If there's not a realistic shot at that, then they're going to be like, well, let's flip the monopoly board, because this is not this is not,
Exactly.
and that's the source of the kind of radicalism that you're seeing amongst young people, and they're never going to vote for a conservative party, even though the causes of that are not because of in many cases they're introduced because of left wing the policies. They're going to kind of blame the property owning class as they see it for their predicament, and yeah,
Well, I think that's really interesting because when you look at the Labor Party's primary vote, it's not high,
no,
right? So it really is a problem for the two major parties around their primary vote. So to say the property class,
mm,
I would see it. What if being centre right was about family
mm,
and community and a better deal, right?
yeah,
I'm probably I think conservatism is sometimes defined as wanting to have this static approach to old, crusty institutions that we're going to
mm,
die on that hill to
mm,
protect. What if all the institutions have actually been overrun by Reds, right?
yeah,
I'm not defending that. So I'm going
mm,
to lead, the skirmish of guerrilla warfares and anyone who wants to come with me up the hill uh, to set something else up, right?
mm,
Because the
mm,
principle of conservatism isn't the institution in themselves.
mm,
They're institutions that have grown out to serve the greater good
mm,
of our humanity, which is the family and the good life, the safe, prosperous, sustainable society that we all want to see. I would argue sometimes that the Greens are almost that old capital C
yeah,
conservative. They take a photo of the forest like it looks now and they want to keep it exactly like that, not understanding it's an organic system that changes over time.
mm,
So I think there's ways we're going to have tough conversations internally
yeah.
about reimagining who we are and how we position ourselves and have those conversations with the public.
Y- yeah, not doctrinaire and not uh,
Yeah.
practical, focused on the real kind of outcomes. I think Andrew Hastie recently, in his much sort of commented on social media post, was talking about not the dog-eared copies of Hayek, but actually looking around and seeing what is going on practically for families and people in the neighbourhood. And I do think there is a little bit of,
Mm.
I mean, Liz Truss.
It's actually the only way. It's actually the only way, Dan.
Yeah,
It's actually
yeah.
the only way.
No, that's right. And Liz Truss, in her speech, the former UK Prime Minister at CPAC,
Mm.
I was surprised at how, frankly, radical her attitude was to tearing down existing institutions. I mean, that's not what you would expect from a, I don't know, Burke
No.
quoting kind of former Conservative Party leader, right? But different times call for different measures, and if the institutions are rotten, then they need to be rejuvenated by any means available, right?
Absolutely right. So I've been in Conservative governments. I've been in the leadership group, senior cabinet minister of
Mm,
those governments where we're like, righto, we've got to, do something about the ABC. So we put in
mm,
new board members, we put in a
yeah.
managing director. Doesn't work because you've got thousands of
Mm,
employees and a culture that's intrinsic to the ABC that you can't change. It's the same with our big universities. The whole immigration topic
mm,
is all about big bureaucracies, big universities, big governments being protected, big business being
mm,
protected. And the Liberal Party hasn't been prepared to go against those elites. So it
mhm,
makes it very hard to have those sort of conversations. But when Liz Truss, now somebody who, when she became Prime Minister, the big state
mm,
ripped her down
mm,
and she made it very clear, the Bank of England's role in that and her own bureaucracy, her own public service, and probably a few in her own team, I might say. Um, Friendly fire is, always gets you in the end in these
yeah,
sort of areas. I think that was very, very true. And
mm,
we shouldn't, that's sort of if she had the opportunity again, she'd do it very differently.
mm,
And it's a bit like Trump. He, the big state, Trump Mark 1, very different to Trump Mark 2, knew
mm,
exactly what he's doing, how he's going to implement the types of policies to actually affect the change he wants to see. And that's the radical approach that I think we missed in government in the
mm,
last 10 years, if I'm honest. And I think, the former prime ministers would probably agree, maybe some of them, not all of them. But,
mm,
we weren't as radical and as smart as we could have been about that sort of institutional change. We
mm,
tried with universities, tried with the ABC, but I think Liz gives us some timely advice. And just bearing in mind, the UK is a lot further down that eroding
mm.
that the West is facing than we are, but it's a real kind of clarion call that we don't have a lot of time to get this right.
Oh, well, they're giving us a warning that the train is coming down the
Abs
track, right? Right. I mean, there is such, at least in my mind, such a potentially attractive vision for, the small, the local, the
Yeah.
semi-regional, the family who is connected with the necessarily kind of infrastructure, health and telecommunications and everything else,
Mm.
but is living in a dog box in, God bless them, North Sydney, right? That must be a more with a big, a bigger yard and the rest of it. That must appeal to people, provided how you actually get there is another matter. Um,
Well,
yeah, go on.
can I just say, Dan, so there has been some research on this post-COVID. So post-COVID, everybody moved out to the regions, and what we've seen is a lot of them have stayed. So the
Mm,
data out of the Regional Australia Institute says once they try it, they want to stay out with us because it isn't just economically working
mm,
for them at a community and a social level and a familial level, it's working for them as well. So it is about having flexible workplaces,
mm,
right? Work from home,
mm.
cooey.
Oh,
Uh, having policies around childcare that actually mean the parents can decide how they carve that up. Having affordable housing out of the suburbs, and I think for centre right governments, maybe getting serious and creative about how we support um, younger generations into their own homes sooner, because that's literally what we have to see. Not so they turn voting Conservative, but so that they can actually live rich and rewarding lives.
it must be a more positive vision, and how you get
Absolutely.
there is another question. Hey, just on that though, I mean, Senator Alex Antic from South Australia, in his CPAC speech, he said, and I thought it was quite striking, it's not 1996 anymore, when he's pitching to the centre right. In many cases, Howard era um,
Mm, mm,
supporters in the audience. What pillars of the Howard era policy framework do you think no longer make sense or need to be rethought now, 2025?
mm. Oh gosh, Dan, I think that's a really interesting question. The Howard era, things that no longer apply. I think the Howard era was incredibly successful at stop, our immigration settings, getting that
Mm.
right. Setting up what doesn't apply. Oh gosh. Sorry, Dan, I should have thought about
That's
this.
all right. To me, it's like mass immigration is one. I mean, we stopped the boats famously, but we sort of
Well,
did
I was
ramp.
going to go to stop. We did stop the boat. So illegal immigration is no longer the threat that it
Mm,
once was.
mm,
I think one of the things that the Howard era and going into subsequent early era iteration of the coalition government um, in, post Tony is that China was a friend. And
mm,
the rise of China was something that we welcomed. We saw it as an economic boom. We really sought to partner with China. We sold them the Darwin port, leased them the Darwin port, etc. So I do think our hopes for um, an open China um, didn't come to fruition, shall we say, in
mm.
the decades post. They are now clearly they have geostrategic challenges for us, and that is going to, I think, take up a lot of our thinking, whoever's in government, around how we deal with that threat and that challenge, not just in our region, but and our own sovereignty, but more broadly around the world. So I would say probably our approach to China would be something that I would change. Sorry. And since the Howard era, we've added another 7 million people. So whilst we've got illegal immigration under control, um, we haven't really had a serious conversation, as I said earlier, about a population and settlement policy that works for
Mm.
all of us here. And the reality is that a vast, a majority of Australians were either born elsewhere or their parents were born elsewhere. That is a fact. Does
Mm.
that make them less Australian? No, it doesn't.
Mm.
So, but I do think we need to be, whether you've been here for 50,000 years, 5 generations, or 5 weeks, you're Australian. We want to build a prosperous, sustainable, and strong, safe country. We need to look after our own. We need to be out, be manufacturing things that we need should things go south regionally. And I don't think we're there yet. I don't think, when we're still having to import urea, things that you need to grow food with, for instance, because we've offshored that type of capacity. That's a risk. I mean, I don't, hats off Hasty, but I don't think we should be worried too much about making cars here in Australia. We need to be making sure we can still make steel. We need to be making sure we can make urea, glyphosate, the type of chemicals we need to grow food and to manufacture um, defence industry parts, etc. That's what's at risk if we get these type of things wrong and if we keep going the way Chris Bowen and Albanese want us to go, and then we are dependent on someone to our north who may not always be acting in our interests.
Yeah, there's a sort of utopianism, I think, that's set in the late '90s, broadly speaking, not just in Australia, that assumed, we'll trade with everyone. Everyone's friends now that the Soviet threat's gone. And there was not of a full appreciation that nations compete with each other and we can't just outsource everything. I mean, cars is one thing. Maybe we'll get there. I mean, I'm going to interview someone from the car industry who thinks it actually is possible in due course. But we don't produce razor blades. I mean, they're not that complicated. I mean, why can't we produce razor blades of all things, right? So
I
because
spoke to a
otherwise,
guy.
yeah,
Oh, sorry. I spoke to a guy last week. They're the last kind of spring manufacturer,
yeah.
and
We don't
so
produce,
this is
we
the
don't produce
type of
glass. Yeah,
industry.
I mean, you
Correct.
know, so
Yeah.
so there's a certain amount of things where I would say to people, it's like, okay, you've got your views on the car industry, but when does the series end? We can't produce cars, we can't produce glass, we can't produce razor blades. What is it we actually can produce other than throwing, David Ricardo at me and saying, comparative advantage, this, that, and the other. I mean, come on, you're a nation. You've got to be able to have a decent industrial base to produce things which can be retrofitted to other purposes when the need
When the
arises. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think, the whole Fukuyama end of history, well, here we are 2 decades later, didn't work out so well. I think we all sort of rested on our laurels a bit there.
Final question, Bridget, because I know you're almost out of time. What do you think will be the big three policy issues that will define the next federal election?
Well, I think, it will be around energy policy. Reducing emissions, being good stewards of the environment is one thing. Tanking your economy and your industrial base is another. And I think the more Australians wake up to that it's not a binary choice, that you can reduce emissions in a way that doesn't trash our industrial base, I think we'll win the argument. Um, I think families is a big, big thing. When we spoke, we didn't really get into the women question earlier, but I do think Australian women have had enough of a political movement that doesn't speak to why they have to choose a career or having a family. Or a superannuation system that doesn't work if the marriage splits up for them. So there's a whole lot of questions around equity for women and families and having a child-centred policy.
Mm,
We've seen atrocious outcomes in industrialised childcare that the Labor Party wants to basically institutionalise our children
mm,
from cradle to grave. We should have a different vision for that and support it with really practical policy. So I think it's going to be having a family policy that works with housing and an energy policy that people see we are credible about reducing emissions without trashing our economy.
yeah. Bridget McKenzie, really good to chat. And I
Always.
always like your practical and straight talking regional style. And good luck flying the flag there, Victoria, and hope you turn things around. Thanks again, Bridget.
Go
Bye.
Conservatives.
Yeah.